I say, Jane, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know who this version of you is. I don't know how we got here. But until I got to that place where I had to start questioning my identity, is how I was able to get to who I am today. Hi guys, so today I want to talk about unearthing your identity. Who are you? Who do people say you are? Who do you believe you are? And who does God say you are? Because all these things are different facets of how we identify ourselves, and we need to arrange them in an order that matters. So the problem with us is we start with the identity that the world gives us. We start with the identity that our children give us. We start with the identity that our jobs give us. And then the identity that God gives us becomes the last thing. But today I want us to do a reverse, it's called reverse psychology. I want us to discuss all these identities and see what really matters. So if I can go back to my experience, when I got married and when I had my first child, actually both children, um, um, when I got my first job. By the way, my first job, I was a face painter, guys. I used to work with a company called Bubujika. I don't know if it still exists, but anyway, whoever I worked with, hi. That was my first job. I was a face painter and a castle minder. But I think throughout life and throughout the experiences that I have had, I have realized that a lot of these things have affected my identity, have affected how I see myself, have affected how I carry myself or how I view myself, how I speak, the things I say, all these things. And a culmination of what all this has really been me sitting down with myself and getting to a point where I can actually say, Jane, I don't know who you are anymore. I don't know who this version of you is. I don't know how we got here. But until I got to that place where I had to start questioning my identity, is how I was able to get to who I am today. So, what am I saying? I'm basically saying that these certain experiences that we go through in life that end up really identifying who we are, that make us bury our true selves, that make us bury our authentic selves, that make us bury the people that we were before all these things of the world defined us. And the reason why I am drawn to women of faith is because as a woman of faith, I know we are very good at masking. We are very good at hiding our struggles. We are very good at hiding our disappointments. We are very good at not talking about the things that are wearing us down, because you know what, we are serving in church. We are serving the younger generation. We are, doing all these things. And so we don't want to look like we are losing control of our lives or the things that are happening to us. And so what happens is we end up journeying through a life of faith that is not authentic. We end up through moving with God in a way that is not authentic. And today I want us to talk about that identity, that person that we lose. Because for me, I think in between, I think the first time I became a mom, I went through a very difficult labor, and I still ended up in theater. So I got my son through a cesarean section. And after that, I think for me, life became numb, or I became numb, or I lost a certain part of Jane, which happens to all of us mothers. We always say after giving birth, there's no going back. There's no going back to that girl that you were. You are now growing into something else. But I think the problem is we put to death the person that we were, yet we need that person to become our authentic selves. So when you put to death the innocence of that girl, the faith of that girl, the strength of that girl, what happens is you start losing your identity, because now you are getting your identity from being a mother. Apart from being a mother, you don't know who you are. Apart from rising in the corporate space where you're doing so well and you're opening branches and companies and all these things are working out for you, you struggle to identify yourself when all these things are stripped away from you. And that is why I'm very big on identity, because I understand that we need to stop separating these things. You need to stop separating your faith from your journey of from your corporate journey, from your motherhood journey, from your marriage, from your relationships. We need to stop putting faith aside. We need to stop saying, yes, I'm all these things, and then hapo chini kabisa ndo unasema, I'm a woman of faith, I believe in God. No, that should be the first thing, because that is what drives who you are. That is what drives your confidence. That is what you're able to stand on when you say, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. That is what you're able to stand on when you say, God has given me authority to stumble over demons and serpents. That is what you're able to stand on. And so because we have reversed this to be the last thing on the rank, yani hizi vitu zingine zote alafu faith kana kuja hapo chini, that is why we are struggling with our identity as women of faith, because we have forgotten where we get our strength from. We have put to death, we have buried that woman that we were, that innocent girl that we were before all these facets of life started becoming. And we lost that girl, and we need that girl to be able to re-identify ourselves, to be able to unearth our identity, to be able to live a life that speaks of our faith, even as we navigate these issues of life. And the reason why I talk so much about faith, and the reason why I'm drawn to you who is a woman of faith, is because we tend to hide behind our faith. Yes, I'm a woman of faith. I serve in church. I serve my family. I serve my in-laws. I serve at work. I serve in all these different facets. But I have learned to put on a mask that I can show up with, and say, I'm a child of God, I'm a woman of God, I'm doing what the Bible requires of me. But deep inside of us, we have buried a lot of anger, a lot of hate with ourselves, a lot of battling with who we are, because that is the younger version of me that I'm talking to today. I allowed myself to be buried in these things that I'm calling beautiful chaos. When I became a mom, the first time when I went through a very painful, I don't want to call it painful labor, but I went through a prolonged labor and then eventually ended up in theater. After that, life changed for me. I got married, and my husband and I had different opinions on different things, and some things I would, you just find yourself having to compromise. And it's things that were important for me. It's things that were leading me. It's things that were leading that Jane. And these are things that happen in our lives. These are things that are there. These are things that we cannot overlook. We cannot not talk about, because for me, having gone through those experiences made me compress the Jane that I was, the Jane that was bold in faith, not because I gave up my faith, but because in between all these different facets of life that you need to navigate, sijui mumekosana, now there's a way you have to get through with family members, and I don't know kama naongea na mtu hapa sijui, but there's certain experiences that you go through in life that leave you numb, that leave you dead, and you decide to just continue with life for the sake of continuing with life. And I think that is the point where I got to. I was just continuing with life. I had accepted a status quo that was not me. I had forgotten that God, has given me an identity that does not fade away despite me becoming a mom, an identity that does not fade away despite me becoming a wife, an identity that does not fade away despite me getting into the corporate space, because the corporate space is brutal. Well, guys, hapa kwa corporate, It's brutal, and you have to navigate through that brutalness. I'm still going to call it those beautiful chaos without losing your faith. And for me, my experiences sort of like really became too heavy for me, that I chose to let go of that little girl who had so much faith, who was moving in bold action. I buried her, and I didn't bury her because I didn't like her or because I didn't care, but because all these things that have happened in my life, I forgot to give that little girl the space that she needs to protect her faith, so that she can continue moving in bold action, even in these spaces that she's serving. And that is why I want to speak to you, woman of faith, just like me. If you feel like you are buried in the stress of life, you are buried in your marriage, you're buried in your in-laws, you're buried in your parenting, you are buried at work, and you know that you have lost a version of you that will help you to move in boldness, a version of you that will help you identify yourself. Because for me, I had to sit down at that point where I said, Jane, I don't know who you are anymore. I had to sit down and I had to start unburying her, unburying that Jane of faith, unburying that Jane of bold action, unburying that Jane of happiness, that Jane of kindness, that Jane of gentleness. I had to start bringing her up because I needed her to be able to navigate life with authentically or with authenticity. Because the problem that I think a lot of us women of faith face is we are moving, yes, we are standing with God, but we are not doing it authentically. We have not reached a place where we have accepted that these things that made us bury who we were in Christ, made us bury our identity. And we have to start uprooting. We have to start bringing that girl back to life. We have to start bringing that person, because that person carries your authenticity. That person carries your faith, that innocent faith, that faith that used to believe that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Guys, at some point I didn't like how I looked. I didn't want to even be around people. I didn't want to speak. I always wanted to be in the background. But that is not the identity that God had given me. And until I started sitting down and unburying that Jane that I buried, that person that I put in a corner, because I was like, aka kasichana wacha kakae tu hapa because hakajui life vile inaenda. But God says you need that girl. You need that girl who you are when you chose to follow God. You need that girl who you are when you are walking in confidence, when you are walking in authenticity, when you loved who you are in your journey of faith. You need that girl even as you're going through these scales of life, because this scales of life is not what defines you. Right now, I'm at a space where I understand that yes, marriage can be difficult. Yes, things are not working out. Yes, my kids can be a headache at some point. But this is not what defines me. I do not stop becoming who God called me to be because I am struggling with 1, 2, 3. I do not stop serving God because of 1, 2, 3. I do not stop showing up for God authentically, guys, not behind a curtain, not behind a facade that you want us to see, but authentically serving Him, authentically presenting ourselves to Him, authentically coming to Him and saying, yes, God, I have these burdens that I am carrying, but I want to be able to serve you authentically. I want you to pull me out. I talked about paralysis the other day. I'm going to find a way to link that video here, that you need to ask God to pull you out of that paralysis, to pull you out of that space where you have allowed yourself to be defined by what is happening around you, where you have allowed your life to revolve around, you have allowed your identity to be marred by the things that are happening around you. But God is reminding us, God is reminding you that you need to step out in bold action. You need to start uplifting that woman of faith that you were before these chaos of life came and defined you. That woman of faith that you were before you were raped. That woman of faith that you were before you started abusing drugs. That woman of faith that you were before you got carried away by the things of this life. We need to start unearthing that lady, because that person carries your identity. That person will remind you who you are in Christ. That person will help you walk in integrity. That person will help you rise up, so that when I talk about faith and bold action, it means that those two things go hand in hand. You've got to have faith to be able to perform your bold action, and you've got to move in boldness to be able to activate your faith. I really hope you have been encouraged. I hope that we can go back to finding our identity, to finding who we were, to go back to unearth all those layers you have put. Hizo zote umeweka. Start and removing them one by one, until you get back to that innocent faith, until you get back to that innocent girl, until you get back to that person that you were when you came to know about God, and you start cultivating that girl, you start encouraging that girl, you start bringing her back into your life, making her a part of your identity. Stop burying her, stop putting her there, stop saying she does not exist anymore. But I want you to rise in faith and start removing those layers that you have put on that girl, because you need her to become your authentic self. And when you become your authentic self, what happens? You end up leaving a lasting impression. Thus, make an impression. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.